Students, I'm Mr. Kelvin Tan. So in this video, I'll be teaching you how to address the essay on market dominance. So this is the basic question. We will be focusing only on part B for this video. So part B is typically the more demanding part of the essay for any student. So in this case, right, we are on the topic of market dominance. The question is, discuss whether government intervention is always needed when a firm dominates the market. So you can tell from the way the question is phrased that it lends itself to what we call the standard TYS approach, the thesis, antithesis, and the synthesis approach, where in your thesis, right, you first talk about how government intervention might be needed. So this is what we call positive economics. And for the antithesis, you talk about why the government intervention might not be needed. So you can see that both the thesis and the antithesis, you focus on positive economics, means you explain the theory why government intervention might be or might not be needed. But at the end, right, for the synthesis, you must be able to take a stand. Okay, out of your thesis and your antithesis, you decide which stand you want to take, and you justify the final stand. So this is a matter of your opinion, which you need to justify. So that's why we call this normative economics. So the question boils down to basically the impact of market structure on society. So for the thesis, right, there are two main points. I will recommend every student to always start with the concept of allocative efficiency. So your first point for your thesis should be that market dominance leads to allocative inefficiency. So that is why the government intervention would be required. Now, this is a good choice because this is the one where you can use a diagram to show precisely how the monopoly, the firm that is dominating the market, tend to produce at price greater than marginal cost. So draw a very nice diagram and explain it well. Now, your tutor would have told you that a good explanation should have good examples. So for this kind of question, right, you may want to choose the example of the software industry. So for example, right, Microsoft dominates the market for computer operating system. So most of you should be using Windows 10. So based on it, right, because Microsoft is the monopoly of Windows 10, they can charge a price that is much greater than the marginal cost for producing the software. Another good example would be pharmaceutical industries. Okay, all the medicine companies. For this case, I'm going to use Pfizer. Now, the good thing about this year, if they ask this question for this year, right, you can make use of the current COVID-19 pandemic. So by using Pfizer, right, what you're trying to say is that the marginal cost of producing the COVID-19 vaccine is actually lower than the actual price you are charging. So P is greater than MC, which will also lead you to allocative inefficiency. The good thing of using Pfizer is that it will set you up nicely for your conclusion, which I'll explain when I reach the conclusion later. Now, this question is on the impact of society, so it's fine to then talk about the deadweight loss, but that you might find that there will be other questions that focus on consumer interest only. Okay, so if you get a question that is phrased similarly, but they focus it on consumer interest, then you shouldn't talk too much about the deadweight loss for questions like that. For this question, you can use deadweight loss, but if for consumer interest, you should then focus on the fact that consumer surplus would be lower if it was dominated by one firm. Okay, that's the first point you can say. Now, the second point for your thesis you can add is that market dominance might lead to productive inefficiency. That means the firms may not have the incentive to lower the cost of production, to produce at the lowest average cost. So these are basically the 2 points you can say. For the antithesis, right, we are basically trying to say what are the benefits to society when there's one firm dominating the market. Now, the first point you can bring in is that market dominance lead to possible supernormal profits in the long run. Now, with supernormal profits in the long run, it is possible for firms to do R&D. Okay, firms have the ability to do R&D. This will lead to dynamic efficiency. Okay, you can make use of a simple evaluation point here. I've talked about the ability, right? But because if one firm dominates the market, even if they can generate supernormal profits, even if they have the ability, they might not have the willingness, because after all, you are the only firm. Okay, so this is one point you can say as a simple evaluation. You can even evaluate this point by saying that actually in reality, right, most of the market dominance we see in the real world are basically oligopolies. Now, with oligopolies, right, they are actually competing firms. Okay, it's not just one firm that dominates the market. So if this is the case, right, you can argue that firms in oligopoly have both the ability as well as the willingness to do R&D. Okay, so the first point is basically that for the antithesis is that market dominance benefits society because the supernormal profits allow it to achieve dynamic efficiency. Now, if you need a second point, basically for a 15-mark essay, you only need to have roughly about 3 points. So since you already have 2 points for your thesis, which if you recall was allocative inefficiency and productive inefficiency, for your antithesis, right, it is okay to just have 1 point that market dominance lead to dynamic efficiency. However, you feel you need another point, right? The fourth point, okay, the second point for the antithesis is that when you have one firm dominates the market, it tends to be large. And when it's large, it can achieve internal EOS. Now, do not just stop there. You have to explain how society benefit when the dominant firm achieve internal EOS. So this is where you can argue that with internal EOS, they are able to produce at a lower average cost. Hence, they can then pass the cost savings to the consumers in the form of lower prices, hence benefiting the society. So if these two antithesis points are true, that means the government shouldn't intervene in the market. Now, you have your 2 points for your thesis, you have 2 points for the antithesis. So in your conclusion, in your synthesis, you must be able to take a stand. Which one will you put your chips on? So this is where I'll teach you, right, a good conclusion for essays like this on whether does the monopoly benefit society, should the government intervention always be done when there's a monopoly, is to do this. Among all the industries in the society, right, there are some industries where we especially value the R&D. Okay, if you recall the antithesis, R&D leads to dynamic efficiency. So some examples of these industries will of course be the software industry, okay, Windows OS. Now my second bullet point is where I'll go back to the current COVID-19 pandemic that I mentioned in the thesis. Now it is quite clear that because of the current pandemic, we want pharmaceutical firms to come up with a vaccine as soon as they can, a vaccine that is good, a vaccine that works. Okay. However, we do understand that if Pfizer, the firm that came out with the first vaccine, doesn't have the supernormal profits, they will not be able to come up with a vaccine so quickly. They will not be able to invest in the huge sunk costs that are necessary to do R&D. And furthermore, right, we also want Pfizer to make sure that to constantly update their current vaccine to handle any new variants of the COVID-19 virus. So this is where we really value the R&D. Okay, we are also aware that actually in terms of the industry for vaccination, Pfizer cannot be just the only firm. There are other competing firms. So it is more of an oligopoly. So we are rest assured that Pfizer will both have the ability as well as the willingness to keep R&D. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry, right, we shouldn't have too much government intervention because there's some value to society that comes from the supernormal profits. However, there are other industries that I feel that R&D is actually not as critical. So you can see that why this is a normative judgment, okay, because this is my view, you may not share the same view. But the point is this, there are some industries where you don't really need the R&D. So the example I like to use would be bread talk. I mean, who really cares that bread comes in different color? Okay, it may be nice to have bread that tastes like kaya, that tastes like durian, that tastes like mangosteen, rambutan, but really, I mean, it may be valuable, but who really needs, the society doesn't really value that kind of R&D as much. Okay, bread is bread. Okay, so in this case, what I'm trying to say is that for such industries like bread talk, where we don't value R&D, right? Maybe the government should be more actively coming in to check that there are no large firms that dominate the market. On the other hand, there are those industries where we value the R&D, okay, it may be better for the government to have a light touch, okay, allow these firms, right, to earn the supernormal profits because we value those R&D. So basically this is my conclusion. So I hope you can see that this conclusion is basically normative. You may not share my view. You may think that R&D in bread talk is very critical, and also you may think that R&D for pharmaceutical is not very critical. That's fine. But the point is for the conclusion, right, take a stand. You have your thesis, you have your antithesis, choose one side, put your chips on that side and try to justify it. So long as it makes reasonable sense, your marker will give it the marks. Okay, so from this presentation, I hope you are more confident now with handling essay B. I thank you for listening and all the best when you write your essay. Thank you.